Good afternoon and welcome everyone. My name's Nolene Duff and I'm the Chair of the Panel of Administrators here at the City of Casey. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the Council meeting for the 14th of December 2021. I have been in the habit of acknowledging the live stream, but this afternoon we also do have a public gallery, so welcome to all of you in the public gallery and those that are watching live stream. We have a number of reports to consider both in open and closed council this afternoon, but I will start with introductions and I will start with the panel of administrators. To my left is Miguel Belmar.
Good afternoon.
And Mr Cameron Boardman.
Good afternoon, Chair.
And we are joined today by our Chief Executive Officer, Mr Glenn Patterson, and we have a number of senior officers with us as well. To my left again is Jen Bednar, Director Customer and Business Transformation, Steve Coldham to my right, everybody's in different places, Director Community Life, welcome Steve, James Collins, Director City Planning and Infrastructure, Kerry New, Director Corporate Services, and we're supported by a number of staff this afternoon, both through our AV, which is Simon, and also our Governance Officer, Nicole, and I welcome other staff that are here present. I'd like to start with the statement of acknowledgement. The City of Casey proudly acknowledges the traditional owners, Casey's Aboriginal communities and their rich culture, and pays respect to their elders past, present and future. We acknowledge Aboriginal people as Australia's first peoples and as the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which we work and live. Now moving to item 1.2, the diversity statement. The City of Casey is home to remarkable diversity with many cultures, languages, faiths and communities of worship, ages, LGBTQI+ identities and landscapes, together forming our rich and dynamic community history. From our first Australians to our most recent arrivals and every wave between, the City of Casey welcomes and represents all community members and their respective ambitions to live healthy, rewarding and happy lives. We recognise this diversity as our strength and we aim to share, nurture and celebrate it. I now move to item 2 on the agenda, which is the confirmation of minutes, and I seek a mover and a seconder to confirm the minutes of the council meeting held on the 16th of November 2021. Do I have a mover?
Yes, Chair, I'll move those.
Thank you, Mr Belmar. And a seconder?
Seconded, Chair.
Thank you, Mr Boardman. All in favour? Carried. Item 3 is declaration of interests. I have considered my obligations under section 130 of the Local Government Act 2020 and have no conflict relevant to the agenda papers. Do any of the administrators or officers have any conflicts to declare?
I have no conflict to declare, Chair.
Thank you, Mr Belmar.
No conflicts to declare as well, Chair.
Mr Cameron. Mr Boardman. Mr Cameron Boardman. And no officers have any interest to declare. Thank you. Item 4 is public question time, and there are no public questions that have been submitted through Council's website for this afternoon's Council meeting. So that takes me straight to item 5, which is officer reports, and there are 11 officer reports this afternoon for consideration at this Council meeting. I move to item 5.1, complaint handling policy and complaints against councillors policy. And we have a recommendation. Is there a mover for that recommendation?
Yes, I will move that, Chair.
Thank you, Mr Boardman. And a seconder?
Yes, I'll second that.
Mr Belmar. Mr Boardman, I invite you to speak to your motion.
Chair, this evening we are supporting the adoption of the complaints handling policy and the complaints against councillors policy, which also covers complaints against administrators. This is a requirement under the 2020 Local Government Act. There is a statutory obligation on behalf of all municipalities to develop and implement and adopt such policies, which must be done by the end of this year, and with a couple of weeks left we are meeting that obligation. A key to this policy is looking at the new definition of a complaint and looking at how the policy itself is enacted, from obligations to the council to record complaints from members of the public or other stakeholders, or in fact internally, if that is the case, the escalation points once the complaint is decided upon from its veracity and its subjectivity, and to follow the policy and the process to seek resolution and/or further action if appropriate. Insofar as the new definition of complaint, it does say that the complaint must be included in communication, whether orally or writing, to the council by a person, and it concerns the dissatisfaction with the quality of the action taken, decision made, service provided by a member of council staff or contractor engaged by the council, the delay by a member of council staff or contractor engaged by the council in taking such action or making a decision or providing a service, and also the policy of a decision made by council or a member of the council staff or contractor regarding the dispute resolution process itself. The key changes as articulated in the public version of the policy, which has been accompanied the notices and communicated through the usual channels, looked at, as I've just said, the definition of the complaint, the 4-tier complaint handling framework to allow for frontline investigations, internal review and external review if necessary, any additional accessible options for customers to make a complaint, and that relates to if individuals or organisations wish to make complaints to external parties such as the Local Government Inspectorate, the Victorian Auditor General's or the Ombudsman's Office, looking at how the responsibilities are updated to reflect the city case's organisational structures, which is quite key because of course there has been since the last policy a number of changes in the leadership and the overall structure of the organisation itself. Avenues for external review if the council does need to bring in external parties to assist with the investigation and or the analysis of the complaints. It expanded on reasonable complainant information, so if there is anything that is vexatious or somewhat inappropriate or unnecessary in the complaint, then that is being dealt with under those definitional aspects, and also inclusion of complaints regarding child safety, which is not just a very significant part of statutory obligations, but of course it is a sensitive matter that needs to be given its due attention in the circumstances. I do want to bring to the public's attention on page 6 of 10 in the complaints handling policy itself regarding the roles and responsibilities, which is important to delineate what those specific roles and responsibilities and how ourselves as an organisation take all complaints seriously and embark upon a process and a methodology to ensure that they are handled sensitively, impartially and appropriately under the policy, and particularly the role of administrators, councillors. To give confidence to the community that we are not the first party to be dealing with complaints. We do not have a role to play in looking at the evaluation of complaints themselves, but we do have an obligation and a responsibility to ensure that all complaints received from members of the community are directed to the relevant organisations and escalation points within the organisation and are managed in accordance with the requirements under this policy. So therefore, giving our community confidence that although we are not the investigators, arbiters of such complaints, our overall obligation to the community is to ensure the process is followed impartially and fairly under this policy, and that resolutions and any mediations are taken in accordance to that. And I think that is a key difference from the past, where there's probably been some degree of misunderstanding of the role of councillors and administrators previously, that they may have had a more hands-on role in such issues. That is certainly not the case, and the policy makes it quite clear on the delineation of roles and responsibilities as I have articulated. With those words, Chair, this is a very important policy, one which goes to our transparency and our accountability obligations to our community to ensure that where there are matters where the community is seeking redress, that they have clear ways of doing so, and that all of the obligations around roles and responsibilities from everyone who works within this organisation are clear, are understood, are enacted, and that those complaints and any other feedback is dealt with fairly, equitably and solved in a timely manner. So with those words, Chair, I'm pleased to adopt the policy in accordance with our statutory obligations and endorse it as a template for dealing with matters from this point forward.
Thank you, Mr Boardman. Mr Belmar.
Thank you, and I don't want to repeat any of the comments that Mr Boardman has made, and I adopt them. What I do want to briefly discuss in seconding this motion is that, importantly, the complaints handling procedures acknowledges and sets out for the community what remedies Council has already put on the table we will be considering as part of our complaints handling procedure. and in particular that where council has made an error, the complaints handling procedure provides for an apology. And that demonstrates for me that apologies are often difficult to obtain from large organisations, and this council is putting on the table that that is something that it will always consider when it's handling a complaint. Secondly, what I want to reflect on is that we set out in the policy that council intends to learn from complaints. And again, it's not just enough that complaints are handled and worked through the organisation. We're setting out for the community in our procedures how we intend to learn from the complaints. And for me, that is a key factor. Finally, I also want to reflect on the fact that we're required to have this policy in accordance with government statute. We're complying with all the deadlines and the timelines to do that, and it's ensuring and again confirming the commitment that we've made to good governance and transparency in ensuring compliance at all times. And with those comments, I'm happy to second the motion.
Thank you, Mr Belmar. I'll put the motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried. Move to item 5.2, Quarter 1 Community Report. This report covers the period from July to September 2021. Do I have a mover?
Yes, I'll move that.
Thank you, Mr Belmar. And a seconder?
Seconded, Chair.
Mr Boardman. Mr Belmar.
Thank you, Chair. It seems not that long ago that we were moving the report for the final quarter of last year. We are, in providing these reports, we set out for the community the work that's been done by Council in the first quarter of this year, and I want to commend all the officers who have worked in preparing this report and acknowledge the work that they've done. Again, this report is affected by the COVID situation, and hopefully we are slowly working our way through that. I note that the report sets out the financial position of Council, and I don't want to say too much about that at this stage in the discussions, so there'll be further opportunity to discuss that tonight. But I note that expenses are lower than budget, but at the same time revenues are also lower than budget, and that's in part affected by COVID. I also want to note tonight that there are new additions to the report which have been included at the request from the Minister for Local Government, and those new additions to our quarterly report, which will be found in all future quarterly reports, includes a section that addresses administrator engagement with the community, and I note that we have participated, the three of us, in 24 events throughout the quarter. I note as well that it will be a requirement that we include contracts awarded over $5 million, and one contract was awarded in this quarter. And thirdly, there'll be an update to the Municipal Monitor's report, and that's contained in an attachment to the report. So again, I commend all officers that have worked. I note that from the report we are continuing to, despite COVID restrictions, provide the capital works that we've set ourselves upon to complete in this year, and unfortunately again it's been affected, but we will do our best to continue to complete those projects as time allows. And with those comments, I'm happy to move this report.
Thank you, Mr Belmar. Mr Boardman.
Thank you, Chair, and I commend Mr Belmar for his comments on this report, which is a very high quality piece of work, and one which we internally remark constantly of the effort and the diligence on behalf of those council officers involved in its research and preparations and equally on their thoroughness. And as we are talking about transparency, particularly as Mr Belmar has articulated the new additions to the report, we are making no secret that there are some areas that we need to improve upon, particularly in relation to community engagement, the focus, roads, potholes, councillor accountability, transparency, which seems to be a theme that does emerge, albeit through single-digit percentages, but it is something we do look at and take on board the feedback we get. But when we look at community satisfaction, which is now conducted quarterly, as Mr Belmar articulated, when we look at the 400 or so responses that is effectively the measure on how we can determine how we're tracking against community expectations, we do note that on this particular quarter there has been an increase, albeit slightly, around the metric that we call trust in council. And that's not just attributable to, I think, the significant improvements we have made in our transparency obligations and reporting to the community on our performance, but also on where we have quite deliberately and clearly articulated where our performance has not been meeting community expectations, albeit that is very much on a limited basis, because we internally performance manage this carefully, but we cannot do more than to communicate where we do need to improve, take notice of quite earnestly, and improve upon that as much as we can. And this document and a quarterly report is one way of doing that, in addition to many other items that we will discuss at this evening's council meeting and previously and in the future. But I think comprehensively it sums up our performance quite clearly. It does provide significant analysis and commentary against the performance measures that we believe are meeting the community's expectations, and where, as I said, we need to improve our performance. And it is one that we would thoroughly encourage the community to review and to provide further feedback on as much as we possibly can. And again, we thank the team for their diligence and hard work in putting together a comprehensive and a very high quality document. Happy to second the recommendation as put.
Thank you, Mr Boardman. I endorse those comments. I think it is, if the community choose to access the material, it's a very comprehensive and detailed appraisal of the work of this organisation in that quarter. So I put the motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried. Item 5.3 is the procurement policy update. Do I have a mover?
Yes, I will move that, Chair.
Thank you, Mr Boardman. And a seconder?
Yes, I'll second that.
Mr Belmar. Mr Boardman.
Chair, on the matter of improving accountability and transparency and decision making, particularly as it relates to our obligations to the community to make value-based assessments on all matters relating to our procurement, council officers have recommended that we endorse the proposed public tender thresholds and select revisions to the KC procurement policy, which will become effective on the 1st of January. We note that the procurement provisions in the new Local Government Act of 2020 will no longer mandate thresholds for public tendering of goods, services and works. Instead, these provisions will permit councils to define their own thresholds for such tenders, and also our own procurement-related exemption processes. We have articulated a policy which is quite detailed and comprehensive in its nature, what those thresholds are and the processes for looking for exemptions. Although that this is further refinement of select parts of our current policy, it will be more closely aligned with what we consider to be procurement best practice. It will certainly facilitate social procurement objectives, and will further enable Casey to deliver improved value for money outcomes, both for the council and the community. And I think there's two key points that we do need to make, Chair, in that regard, is that by going down a more public and articulated policy as we are seeking to adopt this evening, is we will clarify that exemption process and criteria. So actually articulating clearly where we will not seek to go through public tender or what would be considered traditional public procurement basis based upon those revised thresholds, where there are inherent value for money principles embedded into the market exercise, when we know that there are commercial in confidence or other provisions that we need to be cognizant of, or other relevant matters that will be presented to us to be considered on a case-by-case basis. But I also made the point around that we are simplifying the social, economic and environmental sustainability objectives. Those have been defined in the policy itself. Again, it gives clarity to the community that the consistency that we're approach is very much under a best practice governance frameworks, noting that we are going to be talking about good governance frameworks later in this meeting. But I constantly remark, Chair, that these policies, whilst they serve a particular process individually, they do need to be taken into account on a holistic basis to see the total framework that we are adopting at this organisation to ensure that we meet our community transparency obligations and our statutory obligations at the same time as putting in and embedding best practice expectations. I think that the council office has done that quite adequately, in addition to meeting our statutory obligations. And whilst procurement is never the most attractive subject unless things go wrong. This is a policy that is designed to ensure that things don't go wrong, but ourselves as administrators, to the Chief Executive Officer, to the Executive Leadership Team and those that are involved in all aspect of procurement are aware of the thresholds, the definitions, their obligations, the processes and those important review mechanisms on a case-by-case basis. With those words, Chair, I am pleased to endorse the policy as put.
Thank you, Mr Boardman. Mr Belmar.
Thank you, Chair. I commend the officers that have worked on developing this policy and note that it has been open for community consultation. Just want to assure the community that the change in the policy, the adoption of this new policy continues and endorses the procurement principles that across all our procurement activities, Council commits to obtaining value for money, promoting open and fair competition, advancing economic, environmental and social objectives, and acting with integrity, probity and accountability. I am confident on reviewing the material that the policy we're adopting tonight will achieve those procurement principles and that the expenditure of council rates will continue to occur in a manner that is open, transparent, and that at all times the community can have confidence that in our procurement all the steps are being taken in a careful and ethical way. And with those brief comments, I'm happy to second the motion.
Thank you, Mr Belmar. I put the motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried. Now move to item 5.4, Dovetain Pool in the Park Master Plan, and I note we have some community members that are interested in this matter in the gallery, so welcome to you as well. Do I have a mover for the recommendation?
Yes, Chair, I am moving a recommendation. The recommendation I move is an alternative recommendation.
Do we have a copy of the alternative, Nicole? No, we don't. Okay, well, I'll ask you to read that alternative.
I will. I shall. The recommendation I'm moving is as follows. Recommendation 1, the Council notes the engagement outcomes report summarising the draft District Park Concept Plan community engagement held on the 26th of March to 14th of March 2021. Secondly, based on the strong response from the community to retain a pool on the site, a business case is undertaken to understand the financial implications, including capital, operational and maintenance costs of an outdoor pool and year-round accessible park, which should include A, redevelopment and fencing of the seasonal outdoor 50-metre pool. B, upgrade to amenities where heritage permits, including change rooms. C, removal of the water slides, 3 smaller pools, gambetta room and portable building. And D, development of a year-round accessible park, including splash play on the remainder of the site. And 3, notes that following completion of the business case, an ensuing report be presented to Council in the first quarter of 2022.
Thank you, Mr Belmar. So for those that are watching and listening, the alternative motion is really focusing on option 2 that is in the report and seeking direction on a business case and an ensuing report to be put to Council in the first quarter of 2022. So it's only focusing on option 2 in the officer report. Do I have a mover for that alternative?
Yes, I'll move that.
Thank you, Mr Belmar. And a seconder?
Yes, I will second the alternative resolution as Mr Belmar has read and is put.
Thank you. Mr Belmar.
Yes, Chair, before I do that, I've got a copy of the motion that perhaps can be passed to the minute taker who may be able to get that on screen.
Thank you. I invite you to speak to your motion, Mr Belmar.
Thank you, Chair. If I'm just permitted a moment. The motion I'm moving tonight continues the work that Council has undertaken in the last few years with respect to the the Dovetain pool and acknowledges the history of Dovetain pool. We have been able to visit the site, we have been able to consider reports presented to us. We've also been able to engage with members of the community directly in meetings to understand, or I should say to better understand, the role that Dovetain pool plays in the community. I am in no doubt, following all those discussions, that the community has a strong regard and a strong belief that a pool is required at Dovetain, and the motion I have moved tonight makes clear that Council tonight is embarking on work to explore the business case with respect to retaining the pool, redeveloping and fencing the seasonal outdoor 50-metre pool, and upgrading amenities. And the reason we have done that is because we are listening to the community. Attached to the minutes tonight is a copy of the report that's been prepared following the community engagement, and I note that that community engagement process resulted, I'm not going to read out the exact figures, but from the council minutes tonight, it resulted in engagement which included over 63,000 social media engagements, 8,500 mail-outs to local residents, over 4,000 visits to Casey Conversations, over 500 surveys completed, more than 20 hours of face-to-face engagement, and was also translated into video productions in 5 languages and also into over 100 emails sent to various groups and organisations. I want to note in particular the work that's reported in the engagement document, the work undertaken by the students of Dovetain Secondary College. They are neighbours of the pool. It is pretty much in their backyard. Their work in the engagement document is important work because it's informing us as a council as to what the youth in the community consider is important in the community, and it in no small part has contributed to the motion that I am moving tonight. I also note that as part of the motion that I am moving tonight, what we are also considering is the development of a year-round accessible park which includes splash play. One issue which is clear to me from having visited the site and having been aware of the site since my own high school days is that the site is one which in many respects is underutilised throughout the year because of the fact that it spends a lot of the year fenced off as a pool. And so one thing that we really need to consider as a council is the best and further use of the site into the future, and one of those uses is as an ongoing pool, and a further use is also as a year-round accessible park. Finally, I also want to note that as part of the motion that I'm moving tonight, we are confronting the fact that there are parts of the facility that have reached their economic life. They're really at the end of use, and they are, in particular, the water slide or the water slides and 3 smaller pools and other buildings on site, but not the heritage buildings. I want to be clear about that, not the heritage buildings. So the motion that I'm moving tonight acknowledges that we are listening to the community and that the Dovetain pool is an important part of the community. We need to examine a business case to ensure that it can be retained, and that is the motion I'm moving tonight. And certainly next year, after that business case has been developed, we will further consider the future of the pool and the work that needs to be done so that we can carry out the expectations of the community as expressed through our community engagement work. And with those comments, I'm happy to move this motion.
Thank you, Mr Belmar. I do note for those that are watching and listening that the motion that Mr Belmar has moved is now on the screen. Thank you, Mr Boardman.
Thank you, Chair, and I note the personal empathy and sensitivity that Mr Belmar in particular has given to this subject, and all three of us have through a detailed, comprehensive and significantly diligent process over almost 2 years now. When the Casey Aquatic strategy was adopted by the previous council, whilst it was comprehensive in nature of looking at a future mix of aquatic and recreational facilities for the municipality, it did take into consideration what competing and complementary facilities were in neighbouring municipalities, but it looked at it through a lens of replacement and not duplicating what already existed. And whilst that on the surface is quite reasonable insofar as assessing a strategy to deal with the singularity of municipal boundaries, it in no way took in consideration at that stage the comprehensive sentiment, attachment and quite significant long-standing expectation of the community. And the reason I say that is that the strategy was dealing with all range of aquatic facilities. It wasn't just dealing with the Dovetain pool, it was dealing with all of them. And the community probably was not thinking that that they were going to be engaged with their particular geographic patch as it is at that stage. They were probably looking at this holistically and thinking there was quite a significant degree of reasonableness associated with that strategy, and there undoubtedly was. And the reason we are at this stage this afternoon, is that the community has given us a very, very clear message, and the council officers and ourselves have responded to that message. And since the first aquatic strategy was released, the work that the council officers, particularly James Collins and his team, has done with liaising with the community, seeking a significant, diverse and varied input into this particular issue, as it relates not just to the Dovetain pool itself, but the mix of recreational facilities in the whole city has been exemplary. It really has. And Mr Belmar touched on the in-person consultation sessions that were run with the secondary school students and with other community leaders, and ourselves engaging with the community leaders on a very detailed and empathetic basis. And the message clearly and unequivocally was retention of the pool. And so our dilemma has been is that how do we look at that from the overall aquatic strategy that as I said, has some significant and valid merit associated to it, vis-a-vis what the community's expectations are, vis-a-vis what the capital position and the investment principles and basis of the organisation are, vis-a-vis what we can actually do to give the community greater facilities and infrastructure. And I think that the resolution that we are adopting tonight provides the basis for the business case to be dealing with all of those issues on how we as an organisation can retain what the community clearly wants to be retained, on how we can enhance the site to not just provide additional year-round community facilities, but how we can further improve particularly the building and the physical infrastructure of the site to give the community, particularly in that part of the municipality, greater access to facilities which the community clearly will make use of and make use of very well. This is not a decision on this particular issue per se. As Mr Belmar has articulated, this is a decision for the council officers to capitalise on the work that has been done to date, to come back to us with that comprehensive business plan that we have asked for, to look at what all of the capital and non-capital considerations are, to look at the partnerships that we need to further develop and explore with the community, particularly as it relates to the school and the community groups that will use the site, and then to make that decision at a point in the future next year. But I think that overall, with the metrics that Mr Belmar has articulated with the community engagement, with the personal involvement, particularly with James and his team, and I compliment every single member of them, and also with what we have done with hearing that message very clearly. This is the result which I quite sincerely and emphatically believe is what is in the best interest of the community and best represents their expectations. With those words, Chair, I am very pleased to move it, and I thank all council officers for what has been a very long process to get to this point tonight. But I'm very optimistic that we are now at a stage where I have confidence the community will see that we have listened, we have responded, and we will, based upon the veracity and the detail of the business case to be presented early next year, deliver something which will be in the community's best interest. With those words, I'm pleased to support the amended resolution.
Thank you, Mr Boardman. And you've both elaborated in some significant detail about the background to the thinking around this particular motion. And I do want to thank you both. We've had extensive and detailed discussions as a panel about this matter, supported by excellent work from the officers and clearly excellent information from the community as well. As can be seen in the report, there's extensive and detailed engagement that has occurred. We've heard from a lot of people, and we've also had a separate meeting as detailed with key stakeholders, which was held last month, and that was most informative and most helpful in really sort of rounding out the consultation information and all of the technical and other information that we've had from officers. So it's been a really excellent process. I think our conclusion is that it's now time to narrow down the options, and as both Mr Belmar and Mr Boardman have outlined, that is the intention of this motion, that we look at an option that we can realise, we believe we can deliver with council resources, but also with the support of funding from other levels of government, which we would be seeking to support a great outcome for the Dovetain community. So with that, I conclude my comments and put the motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried. Thank you. Now move to item 5.5, which is the rates update December 2021. Do I have a mover?
I will move that, Chair.
Thank you, Mr Boardman, and a seconder.
Yes, I'll second that.
Mr Belmar. Mr Boardman, would you speak to the motion?
Chair, we have discussed this issue a number of times at past council meetings as a significant response to economic and financial hardship that a number of our ratepayers have been affected by because of restrictions imposed from various levels of governments as a consequence of the COVID-19 pandemic. We have looked at the significance and the impact of those restrictions. We have looked at and heard what the community's feedback has been into that situation, and we have, I believe, devised a policy which is not just empathetic to the community expectations, but it is reasonable and measured whilst adhering to our own financial management principles. As most recently, on the 21st of September this year council meeting, we resolved to continue to implement freezes on interest on outstanding rates until the end of this year. We did so because at that stage we were in, I believe, our 6th lockdown. There was the emergence of the Delta strain, which was having significant impacts on the national economy, if not the global economy. And the national roadmap put in place some significant targets for the community to achieve double vaccination status at each milestone and each juncture for, if I can put it very colloquially, freedoms to be reinstated. The national roadmap has, for the most part, been now delivered against. And whilst there has been no doubt a significant upturn in the economic confidence of this state and the nation as a whole, there are still some significant touch points, and they are being addressed through other economic reform and release measures and support mechanisms, which are being provided concurrently by both the Commonwealth Government and the state. But it does create an issue for us as to balancing, as I said, the necessity to ensure that we adhere to good governance principles and sensible economic and financial management, but also representing the interests of all of our ratepayers to ensure that we are not overburdening them with any additional commitments, and we're taking consideration where there is hardship that needs to be addressed and managed. Chair, we've also been very consistent with our messaging around that the first point of recourse for any individual ratepayer within this municipality, if they are experiencing hardship or any degree of difficulty in meeting their obligations to pay their rates, is to contact us. Thankfully we've had many, if not thousands, of ratepayers that have done that, and we have worked through identifying the issues, looking at where we can look at rate payment plans, looking at other flexible measures. Obviously this has been a considerable benefit to not imposing penalty interest and not seeking any recourse through recovery processes. But we're now in that situation where we do need to give a clear message to the community that as of the 31st of December this year, that policy will cease to exist. But I say that on the basis that there will be absolutely no retrospectivity applied to that, and that where there will be a reinstatement of penalty interest rates and recovery action against rates in arrears, that will only occur proportionally and effectively from the 1st of January 2022. We cannot in any way suggest that that is more fair. It is consistent with what other municipalities are, and as I said, it does give that clarity and the confidence to the community that we do need to meet our obligations so we can continue to provide ongoing services, but also we don't want to adversely disadvantage any other ratepayer, including those ratepayers that are meeting their obligations. And to put it in perspective, we do have a very compliant, and thankfully we've got a very significantly respective group of ratepayers within the City of Casey. And if we just look at it, what the situation was as of 30 June 2020, so we go back one financial year ago, there was roughly 11,000 ratepayers with an outstanding balance of 21.7 million. Irrespective that we did not impose penalty interest rates and we did not seek any recovery action, as of the middle of November, that number has almost halved to 6,126 ratepayers with a balance of outstanding of around about 17 million. It's been a significant improvement with no adverse hardship or penalties imposed. We thank the community for, in fact, all members of the community for meeting their obligations to us, which by extension meets their obligations to the community as a whole. But as I said, we do need to now get back to what is a normal situation. But to put it into context, if I could, Chair, there are 133,040 ratepayers within the City of Casey. The arrears balance on an individual ratepayers basis is less than 5% of the overall ratepayers. So we are dealing with an identified group of ratepayers that we know, we are in communication with them. We are working through payment plans and other processes to try and improve those arrears balances, and as I've clearly articulated, on a year-on-year comparative basis, there's been some significant improvement in that. So whilst this has been a decision where we've had significant internal debate on whether we would extend it or not extend it, we've come to a landing that effective 1 January, we need to get back to a normal situation. It is the most fair thing we can do for all ratepayers so that we can continue to meet our obligations, as I said, on service delivery. But most importantly, we do need to have consistency and concurrency around the forecast of our rate revenue, because it is the bulk of our revenue that obviously goes into our service delivery mix. And working with the community, being much more relationship-driven, proactive, we are clearly delivering a very favourable result. And because of the metrics that I've articulated, it only impacts a very small number of ratepayers within the city, and those that we will continue to work with to ensure that we can further correct the situation as necessary. So on the basis of those comments, Chair, I do move the recommendation. I thank all ratepayers in the City of Casey for their consideration and understanding of the difficulty of the decision we have had to make, but it is the dual responsibility of our obligations to our own financial management, conjoined with our obligations to ratepayers, that we do need to today bring this to a close as of the 31st of December this year.
Thank you, Mr. Boardman. Mr. Belmar.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Boardman. I commend and adopt the comments of Mr. Boardman, and I note that there is never an ideal time to undertake debt recovery through legal action or to raise interest revenue. However, as a council, we are responsible for raising revenue, for building infrastructure and delivering services. And we need to balance, as Mr Boardman has articulated, the balance of competing community interests and ensuring that we're able to come up with a decision that's in the best interest of all ratepayers, not just those who have unfortunately fallen into arrears. And I believe that tonight we're adopting what is the most appropriate course. Ultimately, the first port of call, if a person falls into arrears, is to contact council, to have a discussion with our team and to ensure that you're able to always maintain communication open. That is the best way forward. But if council has no other option, then we are able to take steps, and we're deciding to take those steps tonight. The experience here at Casey has been one where we have paused our ordinary course of action for collecting revenue from March 2020 to December 21, which has been the duration of the pandemic and through this period. But we are now at the point where we need to normalise, and we are going to do that. It is appropriate that we revert to our revenue raising practices, and we will now be following the policies that are set out in our financial hardship policies. So I just want to confirm for the community that the first thing you always need to do is, if you are facing any financial hardship on the payment of rates, is to communicate with council. There's no substitute for doing that. And with those comments, I'm happy to second this motion.
Thank you, Mr Bellmer. I put the motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried. Item 5.6 is the Aged and Disability Service Delivery Review. Do I have a mover for the recommendation?
Yes, I'm moving that recommendation, Chair.
Thank you, Mr Bellmer. And a seconder?
Yes, I'll second the recommendation as put, Chair.
Thank you, Mr Boardman. Mr Bellmer.
Thank you, Chair. The Commonwealth Government has been undertaking a reform into aged care which will see a significant change in the aged care sector in the coming years. And in moving this policy, I want to thank the council officers that have worked on this policy and acknowledge their work. Those reforms are welcomed by council as they signal a much needed enhancement in the aged care sector to create a more streamlined and compassionate service stream. Whilst the change is positive, it will result in greater choice and control for consumers. It has also signalled significant changes for council to adjust to the new aged care model, the new funding arrangements, and a range of new clinical and governance requirements. The City of Casey, like many councils, has been monitoring and assessing the reforms to better understand what they mean for council as a provider of services, and how, as a growth council with an ageing population, we can best support our seniors, carers, and those living with a disability. Over the last 2 years, a review of council's aged and disability services has been undertaken with the consideration of the following factors: the reform environment, which I've described, challenges and constraints of continuing the delivery of traditional services, changes in community expectations, trends and demographics, as well as local factors such as the strength of the market in Casey, so that we can ensure that all residents can still access a service should council step out of service delivery, and the market will continue to meet the forecast increases in demand for services that come with an ageing population. Our review also looked at service gaps and unmet needs in the community. Clients, staff, service providers and community members have been engaged to better understand needs and experiences relating to accessing services and support what makes Casey a good place to live and a good place to age. The information was used to consider a range of options for council and where council might be best placed to support our seniors and those living with a disability now and into the future. Those options were shared with a range of stakeholders, and the strategic, social, financial and legal implications were methodically unpacked to arrive at a recommendation which is outlined in the report and which is endorsed in the motion that I am moving. In reviewing the options and the strategic, social, financial and legal considerations of each, Council's position will be, firstly, to exit the delivery of traditional aged care and disability services. Second, to ensure we continue to support vulnerable community members, including continuing in services where there might be a gap or thin market, and to reorient Council's role to support the community by investing in age-friendly cities, which is a model that can grow and respond to the community needs. Whilst this has been a very difficult decision for Council, as we have delivered this essential service for many years, we can see that the aged care landscape is changing, and so too is the policy, economic and social environments in which we operate. The City of Casey has a strong and growing market with providers that are aged care specialists delivering attractive wraparound services. This means that residents will still be able to access all services that they currently do through Council, with Council being committed to continue to deliver services where there are no other quality providers available. Council will be in a position to reorient its role and address the concerns and improvements raised by the community through the recent Living and Ageing Well in Casey survey, which had over 1,100 responses. By reorientating Council's role, we will be able to complement the service sector and continue to support seniors, carers and those living with a disability, but just in a different way. Some examples of what Council could do have been highlighted in the report, and they include things such as supporting residents to access information and navigate the currently very complex service system, and to work with the community to address widespread experiences of loneliness, as well as concerns about safety and transport difficulties. So the motion that I've moved confirms that we are changing the way that aged care services are provided by the City of Casey, but I want to assure the community that Council is adopting a motion tonight which commits us to being there in the background and to continue to provide services to the most vulnerable in our community. I also want to thank all those Council staff who have, over the years, provided this very important service. They are, in many respects, the backbone of Council and the social work that it does with our aged population. They are tireless workers who, day to day, go into people's homes, help them in their homes, take them out, and spend important time with people who often it is the only person that they see during their day. And I want to commend all the staff who have done that work directly, and also all the staff who have worked in back office roles, ensuring that we are able to provide those services. However, as I've articulated, there is a change occurring, and Council will do that carefully and ensuring that no one is left without the service that they require. And with those comments, I move this motion.
Thank you, Mr Belmar. Mr Boardman.
Thank you, Chair. I strongly echo and endorse the comments from Mr Belmar and commence my commentary by articulating to the community that it is very difficult to understand the magnitude of research, evaluation, consideration and every input into this decision-making process by a 10 or so page council report which has appeared publicly. There are understandably many confidential attachments to this report which are confidential in nature because they contain sensitive information. There's commercial and confidence information. There is service mix evaluative information which has been inputs into our decision making. But there has to be a reassurance to the community that this is not a process which is in any way reflected by a public 10-page report. It's a process that has been going on for many months, many years. There has been literally hundreds, if not thousands, of touch points with the community, and predominantly staff who are providing the service on Casey's behalf currently and the clients who are receiving the service. and many other stakeholders, including the private sector, who, if we adopt this resolution tonight, will be continuing to provide those vital services to members of our community as articulated. It does need to be qualified that Council is in this position because of the Commonwealth Government's response to the recommendations from the Aged Care Royal Commission. And whilst those responses did look at service mix from an ongoing and sustainable basis, it also made it quite clear that in order to get a much more effective, personalised and value for money degree of service to those members of the community who are vulnerable and need of such services, that all aspects of the competitive and existing service mix needed to be evaluated. And from a Casey perspective, we've done that. And the starting principles that we have applied in order to make this decision has been, we want to ensure that there is no current client that is in any way disadvantaged whatsoever by this decision, and that is absolutely critical. And so the reinvestment proposal that we are articulating tonight, which is consistent with Victoria's age-friendly Victorian declaration to ensure that the rights of the age and disability sector is reflected and acted upon, and that those basic levels of services are met, is quite critical to that. And that's why the level of outreach and the comprehensive nature of the engagement with existing clients has been so substantial. The other matter that I alluded to was to look at what the existing service mix is, and we know that there are many, if not hundreds, of service providers nationally, many dozens in Casey who are providing this, and it is a very subjective assessment for us to make on whether or not we are providing this better, worse, cheaper, more expensive, value for money, all of the other inputs that go into this. But the reality from what the Commonwealth has articulated from a policy perspective is that it would not be in any way viable for us as an organisation to continue to provide this. In fact, it may even be a disadvantage to our community. So what we have articulated through this extraordinarily detailed and considered approach is to look at where there are gaps that need to be filled, and Mr Belmar has outlined a number of those around transports, around meal and outreach services, case management, informing of the clients of the changes, reducing barriers to access new services, and looking at particularly that key issue around loneliness, which is becoming a much more significant and prevalent, unfortunate, almost endemic situation within our community. But to ensure that there is streamlined transference from the client's mix to the service delivery and importantly the staff who currently work for Casey. Doing that in a considered, in a measured and in a sensitive approach where we meet the deadlines as articulated in the recommendations, and we also comply with the Commonwealth's policy accordingly. It's not an easy decision to make. It is one where understandably there will be significant community anxiety, but a degree of proactivity that the council officers have undertaken at our end to address those issues head on and to engage with all of those sectors of the affected community as proactively, as sensitively and as detailed as possible will hopefully go a long way to alleviating a number of those concerns. From my perspective and from an administrator's perspective, this is in the best interests of the service providers and certainly the service receivers. It is also in the best interests of the organisation so that we are not in a situation in the future of supplementing potentially what might not necessarily be a best case service that could be better provided through external parties. But I go back to my starting comments, Chair, is that our starting principle was to ensure that every client was as minimally affected as possible, and I'm confident that has occurred, that every current staff member has been engaged with, consulted, and that a very appropriate, responsive and sensitive transition strategy has been put in place, and that all factors around the information and detail we needed to make what is a very sensitive decision tonight has been thoroughly articulated, tested, put on the table, fed back into the process, and has been given us the required evidence to make that decision. With those comments, I am supporting the recommendation, understanding that there will be, unfortunately, some further challenges with this, but I have confidence in the team that those challenges can be realised and that we can go back to that starting principle, that there will be minimal disruption to clients, to service providers, and that these vital and necessary services to those affected members of our community continue to be provided accordingly, sensitively and appropriately.
Thank you, Mr Boardman. I won't be repetitive because you've both covered such a depth of issues, but having had involvement in services such as this over a long period of time, I really do appreciate the extensive nature of the work that the staff team here have done in providing us with the highest quality information, and also the assurance that we've been given in terms of the quality of the implementation process that will subsequently occur beyond this decision. I think we have a lot of faith in the fact that people, as both Mr Belmar and Mr Boardman have outlined, will be very strongly supported through this process, bearing in mind that change for many of the clients in this program is going to be quite challenging. And also, Mr Belmar mentioned the number of staff over time that have supported so many thousands of older people and people with higher needs in this community. The dedication and service that they provide, the level of attachment that I know they have to clients is enormous, and we also feel very confident that they too will be strongly supported through this transition. And I think the intention is that many of those people, should they choose to, will have employment going forward. And the team here have worked both closely in trying to balance the fact that no decision has been made until tonight, keeping people informed, also keeping staff informed, but liaising with the ASU as the key union involved. And I think I commend the staff on the process that they've engaged. As both Mr Belmar and Mr Boardman have outlined, this is not the conclusion of Council's involvement with older people and people with disabilities and special needs in this community. In fact, it's just a new phase of that. And there is a very strong commitment by the Council to continue to support people, to make sure that services that aren't necessarily available by service providers in the Casey community, that we play a role in that, and that's going to be important in an ongoing way. But also to ensure that we're a key player still in the planning of these services at the local level, ensuring that we have a liaison role with the responsible levels of government to ensure that Casey is represented and that we are advocates on behalf of those people that can't speak for themselves. So once again, thank you to all of the staff that have been involved, to those people in the community that contributed through the consultation process to identify and help us to understand what their needs will be into the future. And thank you both Mr Belmar and Mr Boardman for your dedication to thinking through and understanding these issues. So on that note, I'll put the motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried. Thank you. We now move to item 5.7, the Domestic Animal Management Plan 2021 to 25. Do I have a mover?
I will move that recommendation, Chair.
Thank you, Mr Boardman. And a seconder?
Yes, I'll second that.
Mr Belmar. Mr Boardman.
Chair, all councils have an obligation under the State Domestic Animals Act 1994 to renew their Domestic Animal Action Plan every 4 years, and that is what we are doing. Tragically, there does seem to be a degree of prevalence, albeit that has changed circumstantially because of restrictions imposed by the COVID-19 pandemic, but there did seem to be a trending upwards of incidents relating to dangerous and other pest animals. When councils go through this review process, it needs to take into consideration what the current circumstances are, but also what comparable circumstances are with other municipalities, and to look at what are the best practice learnings that can be incorporated in such a plan, and also to identify some strategic themes that need to be delivered against the obligations of both the council, pet owners, broader Casey community, but also to start with that principle around pets, where pets and people can safely coexist. So there's a significant educative component to this particular policy, but there is also equally a very important protective component to ensure that nuisance and dangerous pests do not unfortunately impact upon any member of the community, and that if there are such incidents that they are taken consideration and they are dealt with accordingly. And in the report, to give an indication of the scale of this problem, in 2019-20 there were 280 or just over 280,000 infringements relating to pest and dangerous animals issued, albeit that did decrease to just over 141,000 over the corresponding financial years because of the circumstances I've articulated, but it is an extremely significant issue for the organisation, not just from an infringement and enforcement basis, but also from a resource planning basis, so that the community services and other teams within the organisation have got the right level of resources to respond, to deal with, and to mitigate any of these instances if they do occur. So as I said, I just want to touch briefly on the strategic themes within this plan, and it is a very important plan insofar as going to the core of some of our basic service deliveries, but it does set out a method for evaluating what the animal control service provided the council are insofar as its adequacy, and it gives an indication of our desire and requirements to meet our obligations under the Act. It outlines the programs for the training of authorised officers to ensure that they can properly administer and enforce the requirements of the Act and consistent with the plan. And it outlines program services and strategies which the council needs to and has to pursue in accordance to the responsible ownerships of dogs and cats, regulations as they relate to legislations to minimise the risk of attacks of dogs and other dangerous animals on people and other animals, in fact, to address any overpopulation and high euthanasia rates for dogs and cats, to encourage the registration and identification of dogs and cats, to minimise the potential for dogs and cats to create a nuisance, and to effectively and clearly identify dangerous dogs, menacing dogs, restricted breed dogs in the municipality to ensure that those dogs are kept in compliance with the Acts and regulations. So it all encompassing. It is very clear insofar as how we are seeking to meet our obligations under the Domestic Animals Act and providing the necessary resources, mitigation and other requirements from the council staff to deal with those strategic themes and respond accordingly. It is important that all pet and animal owners within the municipality understand their obligations. Equally, their obligations are clearly articulated within the animal management plan, and I'm sure that those that have an interest in this matter will be able to interpret and read and comply with their obligations accordingly. But there is an executive summary which puts into quite a neat perspective as to what those individual responsibilities are, and that is the key part of the plan which members of the community as affected do need to reflect upon and adhere by. So with those comments, Chair, I'm pleased to endorse the Domestic Animal Plan for 2021 to 2025 and thank all of those council officers that work within this area, and note that as we do get back to a more normal situation of being out in the community and at work and enjoying our open spaces, that there will be, unfortunately, an uptick in those instances that will require input and mitigation, but we have developed a plan and provided adequate resources necessary to address and respond accordingly.
Thank you, Mr Boardman. Mr Belmar.
Thank you, Chair, and I thank Mr Boardman for his comments, and I'll be brief and to the point, Chair. The motion that we're passing tonight in adopting these policies demonstrate this council's commitment to ensuring responsible pet management. It's fundamental that if you're going to have a pet, you've got to be responsible for it, and council tonight sets out what is expected. I know in the past the Domestic Animal Act, or as it was previously known, the Dog Act, might have caused some mirth or some laughter as to why is there legislation or why are we concerned about these sorts of things. Well, we're concerned about it because of the sorts of matters that are set out in this policy. We're concerned about it because of the fact that there are just too many dog attacks there's too many cats at large, and council needs to spend time, money and resources in ensuring that there is compliance. This is an issue about which this council is concerned and will always ensure that there is compliance with the residents' obligations in the good management and husbandry of their animals. I note in particular the work that is done by members of the staff who work in this area. I note that at times it can be very difficult work, it can be challenging work because they are dealing with people in very stressful situations. I note that as part of the briefing that I've received, that there will be further work done in preparing kits and information for people who have unfortunately been either subjected to or witnessed incidents involving animals or dog attacks in particular. And I just note that that is another reason why it is always important to ensure that you're in compliance with your obligations, because the impact of not being in compliance isn't just the immediate shock or trauma of witnessing what's occurred. It's a ripple effect, and it's much broader and affects a much wider part of our community, including those that need to attend and respond, and those that sometimes live with life-changing injuries as a result of not properly caring or looking after your pet. And so with those comments, and again thanking those members of the community that do, or of our staff who do this work and have prepared this policy, I'm happy to second this motion.
Thank you, Mr Belmar. I'll put the motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried. We now move to item 5.8, which is the Good Governance Framework, and I note that that is a reincorporation of a number of documents previously adopted, but nevertheless a very important matter. Do I have a mover?
Yes, I'm moving that.
Thank you, Mr Belmar, and a seconder.
Seconded, Chair.
Thank you, Mr Boardman. Mr Belmar?
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to move this motion tonight, and noting the comments that you've made, Chair, and noting that this is revoking a number of policies and endorsing one new document. I note that good governance is never achieved on one occasion. It is a constant matter of concern for this council. It's something that is a constant work in progress, and I note that through this document tonight we are adopting a policy that sets out very clearly and transparently for the community the roles and working relationships between the Chief Executive Officer and Council, the roles of our executive leadership team, the roles of directors, and understanding those roles and how they will fulfil those roles. I note as well that as part of the policy we are adopting tonight, it's an ambitious policy in terms of the future state that we want to achieve and the sorts of continuing improvement that we want to achieve in strategic matters such as having continuous improvement and mindset to good governance and integrity processes, becoming a sector leader and supporting other councils in good governance and practices, educating the community to increase awareness of the available information via registers, freedom of information and council business papers, and importantly having a continuous improvement mindset for the improvement to the functions of the office of the Mayor, Councillors and, in our case, the administrators. I don't want to belabour the point, but as I've said, this is not just we adopt this policy tonight, but really we are setting goals for ourselves as to how we want to function as an organisation and what we can achieve in the future. It's part of the important role that we play in ensuring that this council, by adopting policies such as this, is always at the cutting edge of ensuring good governance. And it's not just about, can I say, simple adherence to statute. We can do better than that, and we aim to do better than that, and do it in every part of the work and functions that we undertake. And so with those comments, I want to assure the community that this is a council which is functioning well, which is functioning in accordance with best governance principles, and in adopting this policy, we are confirming that that's where we want to be. And with those comments, I move this motion.
Thank you, Mr Belmar. Mr Boardman?
Thank you, Chair. As Mr Belmar has articulated, I don't see this document as an aspiration. I see this as a necessity. And policies such as this, irrespective of it being incorporating a number of previous strategies, framework, action plans, etc., it is a document where every single individual who has an association with this organisation, either as an employee or us as administrators or in other capacities, needs to read, adhere to, understand, comply with, and to ensure that they don't just, as Mr Belmar has articulated, meet the standards and the requirements but exceed them. And that's the measure that we put on its success, that we are in fact exceeding the standards and the principles that the framework itself entails. And that relates to all matters of culture, behaviour, direction, leadership, decision-making, structure, systems, communication, community engagement, capability, risk and compliance, and monitoring and review. So there is embedded into the framework a continuous improvement and self and peer assessment function that, as I said, is if we are not being true to what the framework entails and ensuring that ourselves are being exemplars of the framework as administrators and imparting that culture from very much a top-down perspective, then it is going to be very difficult for us to ensure that there is understanding, adherence and compliance in other levels of the organisation. So we set ourselves a very high standard, a very high bar to comply with the framework, and we have vigilantly and diligently and extensively reviewed what are the principles, the requirements, the processes and obligations. And from a personal perspective, and certainly echoing the words from Mr Belmar, it is a standard that we do in fact seek to not just adhere but exceed. And with those words, Chair, I am pleased to adopt it and to use it as the guiding principle for my future behaviours within the organisation.
Thank you, Mr Boardman. I'll put the motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried. Item 5.9 is the CEO Employment and Remuneration Policy, and once again we have been working our way through compliance with the Local Government Act 2020, and this is a re-endorsement, if you like, of this policy in accordance with the Act. Do I have a mover?
I will move that, Chair.
Thank you, Mr Boardman, and a seconder.
Yes, I'll second that.
Thank you, Mr Belmar. Mr Boardman?
Chair, I don't intend to make or provide much commentary on this. This is, as you've articulated, a requirement under the Act, and whilst there is transparency around our obligations to the CEO and by in turn to the community around how we engage with and employ the CEO, those matters themselves are confidential in nature and need to be treated as such. But to give confidence to the community is that the policy and the principles that guide the implementation of any contractual or other performance-related interactions between ourselves and the CEO are thoroughly adhered by, and very recently, Chair, we have done exactly that. So it is very clear in the intent of the structure of the relationship, but the detail around the relationship itself are matters between us and the CEO. And I'm very pleased, as we have articulated tonight, and that the quality of the work in the officer's report and a number of these very significant and strategic decisions that we are making tonight proves that the organisation is functioning at a very high level, and we hope that that will undoubtedly continue into the future.
Thank you. Mr Belmar?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just picking up on the comments of Mr Boardman, who's moved this motion. I'm happy to second this motion and note that, as has been articulated, there are many parts of the work that we do in the background with respect to the employment of the CEO which are confidential in nature, but this policy is an open policy available for the community to consider as to the structure of as to how we both recruit and remunerate a CEO. Have read the policy, considered the policy, and note that it is in compliance with the Act. But similarly as to the good governance policy that we have adopted, it's not just about having this policy and meeting it, it's about at all times doing the best we can and exceeding it and using this as the basic boundaries. Having made those comments, I also want to reflect on the fact that, as Mr Boardman has articulated, the CEO of our organisation provides at all times the highest level of advice, and also the staff that work with him also provide the highest level of advice. And so with those comments, I'm happy to second this motion.
Thank you, Mr Belmar. I put the motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried. Item 5.10, Casey Growth Areas Payment from Reserves. Do I have a mover?
Yes, I will move that.
Thank you, Mr Belmar. And a seconder?
Seconded, Chair.
Mr Boardman. Mr Belmar.
Thank you, Chair. This is a motion that comes to us as set out in the notice paper. It's also authorising the CEO delegate to make payments in accordance with a confidential attachment, which I have read and considered. I note that the papers set out where the payments are required and what they are relevant to. They're relevant to works that have been done in sections of Bells Road progressively. They're also with respect to public open space reserves, and I am confident and satisfied that it is appropriate that payments be made from contribution plan reserves and public open space reserves for the claims that have occurred, and for the funds to be released in compliance with those requests, understanding that the work is in progress and it's appropriate for, it's either in progress or completed, and it's appropriate that funds be deployed in accordance with Council's statutory obligations. And with those comments, I'm happy to move the motion.
Thank you, Mr Belmar. And Mr Boardman.
Chair, there's very little I can add to what is a procedural motion, apart from I've also reviewed the confidential information and likewise agree with the proposal as put, and happy to second based on the debate that Mr Belmar has already articulated.
Thank you. I'll put the motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried. Our final item this afternoon is item 5.11, and that's contract acceptance and sealing of the contract for the Casey Fields soccer. Do I have a mover?
Chair, I will move that.
And a seconder?
Yes, I'll second that.
Thank you. Mr Boardman.
Chair, it's an exciting development down at Casey Fields. We not so long ago resolved for the Melbourne City Football Club to enter into a 30-year lease with ourselves at the municipality for Casey Fields for the new training administrative headquarters, and a number of initiatives have taken place to gradually improve the facilities to not just meet the expectations and requirements of Melbourne City, but also of the community as a whole. And this afternoon or this evening now, this is an example of further improvement to the overall mix of facilities. This is the Casey Fields Soccer Pavilion extension. It's a contract that has gone through a vigilant and diligent tender process where I'm quite satisfied that all of the relevant requirements under probity and procurement have been complied with, albeit noting that there is a requirement on the recommendation for additional funds over the initial council commitment to the project of just on $675,000 as stipulated in the public report, and by doing that and accepting the contract as provided, and the successful tenderer being Harris HMC Interiors Proprietary Limited, that we are undoubtedly receiving a world-class service provider to build and further extend a world-class facility, one that is really starting to pay community dividends, and we only need to see that the increased interest and attendance at Melbourne City football matches is showing that they are undoubtedly doing something right, irrespective that they are continually to be reigning premiers, which is a fact I am very pleased to know. But that being the case, I'm consistent with the policies we've articulated that this is a contract that we are accepting in addition to the additional allocation to meet the contractors and the tender results. And I certainly wish the contractor best wishes with the extension, but most importantly, the continual improvement of Casey Fields, not just for the Melbourne City Football Club, but all users within the Casey municipality as a whole.
Thank you, Mr Boardman. Mr Belmar.
Thank you, Chair. If I can, in seconding this motion, just pick up where Mr Boardman concluded, and that is, from my point of view, what is important about the motion that we're moving, seconding tonight, is that we are continuing our commitment to the lease that has been entered into by Melbourne City Football Club, and to ensure that the facilities that are available on site are appropriately world class, and note that tonight this motion will ensure that the construction of the administration facilities that are needed there, and also include implementation of ESD initiatives, and will also be used towards the grandstand and gallery frame, and to remove and reinstate other facilities. What's important about this on reflection is that the community and the young people who use those facilities will see that this council supports sport. It supports the use of facilities by organisations such as Melbourne City Football Club, and shows those young people that right here in Casey, in their community, there are world-class facilities used by professional sporting teams, and that any aspirations that they have in that regard, they don't have to go too far to see it in motion, and that's something which is really a great thing for our community to be able to see that occurring in their own backyard. And so with those comments, and noting that I have considered the material and congratulating the successful tenderer, I'm happy to second this motion.
Thank you, Mr Belmar. I'll put the motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried. Thank you. That concludes the officer reports this afternoon. I'll move to item 6, which is consideration of reports of committees, and I note the record of discussion listed in the agenda papers be received and noted. Item 7 is petitions, and there are no petitions for the council meeting this afternoon. Item 8 is urgent business, and there are no urgent business items for the meeting today. So that takes me to closed council. There are 3 items we'll be considering in closed council, and they will be considered under section 3 of the Local Government Act 2020, which relates to a range of matters: council business information, land use planning information, and also personal information. So with that, I close the open meeting and thank all of you for your presentation today in the gallery, and for those that have been listening live stream, good afternoon.